Hey everyone, hope you're enjoying your Chinese New Year. I'm here doing my assignment for Dr. Wyman's class. My topic is language policies. The first thing that I'm going to do is give you an outline of what I will be talking about, and then we'll dig right in. The first thing I will talk about is just some background information of language policies here in China. The second thing is understanding how the system is broken down and who is responsible for the policies and their implementation here in China. The third thing is we're going to really dig into this debate of literacy versus literacy education policies. The fourth thing is we'll talk about the challenges for literacy in China, and 3 and 4 kind of go hand in hand. The fifth thing we'll talk about is what sparked China's interest in learning English. How did this English frenzy come about? And then the sixth thing we'll talk about is an article that I read that talks about the war on the English language that is currently going on as we're here teaching English. All right. The first thing I'll do is the article that I read was the China Country Study produced by Heidi Rose in 2015. She first starts off by talking about how at the turn of the century, so 1900s, between 85 and 90% of the country was considered illiterate, and over a 50-year span, that never changed. Most of the individuals continued to be illiterate, and there wasn't really a spurt in literacy here in China until the 1950s when Mao Zedong was in power. From my personal opinion, I really think that it had to do with individuals being able to read the Little Red Book, and I think that this is why you get a spurt in literacy during the 1950s, and even more of a spurt when Deng Xiaoping comes into office in 1978. So a study was done, Heidi Ross documents it, that in 2000, 87 million adults in China were considered illiterate. So it sounds like a large number, but we have to put it in context that China has 1 billion people. So in 2001, just 1 year later, they actually came out with some new data that basically said that they had met their requirements as far as what they felt were policies that they implemented in order to provide the country and the citizens of the country with tools in order to move themselves from illiterate to literate. The first thing is that they achieved by implementing a policy that that promoted and produced compulsory education for students all the way up until grade 9. Everybody had to attend school. This was produced in all of the regions in China, all cities, all municipalities. Everybody was able to receive compulsory education up until grade 9. And the second thing that they felt they met in 2001 was that they were able to eradicate illiteracy among youth and middle-aged adults during this time. So they really felt in 2001 that the policies that they had been implementing were contributing to the reduction in the illiteracy rate in China. Another part of the research I read was that although China has experienced a quadrupling in the per capita income of its citizens, and 1/4 of the population was able to lift themselves out of poverty, or they were able to remove themselves from poverty, there still doesn't seem to be an overall guaranteed push that a majority of the citizens are going to be considered illiterate. It seems that the numbers have slowed down as far as the growth in literate individuals, but the number of illiterate people has kind of remained constant. There's really no change in all of those, even though China has produced more individuals who have lifted themselves out of poverty. So it seems as though that 1/4 of the population that was able to lift themselves out of poverty are actually reaping the rewards and benefits of the robust economic growth in China. So this is going to kind of play a role into to some other topics that we're going to talk about as far as the inequalities and the disparities of rural education versus urban education. So the next thing that we'll talk about is understanding how the system is broken down and who is implementing what policy. So the state council is actually in charge of running the country's kind of day-to-day things. They're in charge of the principles and the policies designed by the CCP. They are also in charge of regulations and all of the laws that are implemented in the CCP. And there is a council that's composed of a lot of different individuals: the premier, the vice premier, ministries, commissions, generals, and secretary general. The ministries that they do have are broken up into, in my opinion, quite workable parts. So the ministries include foreign affairs, and the ministries are just focused on that one topic. So foreign affairs is just about foreign affairs, nothing else. It doesn't slide into any other part or any other ministry. So you have foreign affairs, national defense, science and technology, public safety, state security, finance, education, and a few other things. So the Ministry of Education is the supreme authority of everything that has to do with education. Any of you all that are doing any research on education here in China, if you're looking for information, that's where you need to focus your attention. So the Ministry of Education in 1986 was responsible for creating compulsory education that was put in place in the country during that time. It provided a specific law that gave students education up to at least grade 9. So this is broken down into 6 years of primary education and then 3 years of junior secondary education. After the junior secondary education, there's a test called the Zhongkao. The Zhongkao is basically weeding out the most academically inclined and most academically capable individuals to move on to senior high school. Those who do not score well on that test do not get to move to high school. And then there's also the Gaokao that comes after high school, that test to see if students are going to be able to get into a university, and depending on their school will depend on what type of university they're able to get into, as far as is it a top tier, second tier, third tier university. In 2001, the Ministry of Education, in the efforts to reform and accelerate education quality, they began to offer English in schools in 2001. So China has always had some connection to English, but there was never a push to have education or to have English in school settings until 2001. The rationale for English is clear. China is moving into modernity. China is becoming a global player. They're worried about international economic trade. They're worried about being able to have exchanges with other countries, tourism, just so many different things. And so in order to meet the needs that benefit the country, there had to be some reforms put in place that supported globalization, and so the demand of English mastery was one of those things. The philosophy of the Ministry of Education is the key to modernization. So this idea is touted as the guide. We need to be able to provide substantial education, and the education needs to be in the benefit of basically how the society is moving. Since the society is moving towards globalization, education in those spheres, in those subjects or whatever is needed in order to be a global player, the education system is going to design policies in order to educate their individuals to be able to live in that space. The next thing we'll talk about is the debate of literacy versus literacy education policy. So, to me, this is very interesting because there's some confusion in China about what is considered functional literacy in China, and we've all been here. I've been here since 2011, but you all that are new here have been in the country for 5-6 months now, and so I know that you've listened to people speak Chinese, and maybe you don't understand anything that's going on, but I know for certain that you have heard people speaking and thought they're speaking another language, but it's not what I'm normally used to hearing. And most of them are speaking what is considered a local dialect. They're speaking Shanghai Hua, or my individuals in Kunming Hua. So they're speaking a local dialect. So when trying to understand functional literacy, there seems to be a disconnect on what is the overall standard that kind of puts the people who have the ability to have standard Putonghua or Mandarin as the basis of their education, the basis of their learning, with individuals who come from rural areas that may not have as much of a push to learn standard Mandarin or Putonghua. So they're having a hard time finding that middle line. How do we rate individuals as literate when daily life students or individuals are using the local language only in schools, or their occupation are they using the standard language, and other individuals who are in the urban areas are able to use Putonghua on a daily basis in their jobs when they're talking to their friends and family. So there just seems to be some disconnect there, in my opinion. There's 3 key features for functional literacy. So the first one is the preponderance of literacy definitions based on an individual's ability to recognize a minimum number of characters. So if you are considered literate in Chinese society, there's a minimum number of characters that you're supposed to be able to recognize. And these things change depending on if a student is learning Putonghua at home, or if they're learning a minority language, or if they're learning a local language. So it's, they're not getting as much as another student or another individual is getting, depending on their atmosphere that they're living in. The second thing is the maintenance of different levels of competency for rural and urban residents. So again, there doesn't seem to be a line where, how do we combine the 2 different levels of competency that we're seeing in rural areas versus urban areas? Where's the line? The third thing is that literacy often means literacy in the standard modern Chinese rather than any national modern language. Cantonese is spoken all around southern China. In Guangdong province, in Hong Kong, Cantonese is everywhere. But it's not considered the standard language. And so those individuals not being able to recognize a specific amount of characters, or not being able to speak, or not being able to read this language would be considered illiterate in the Chinese standards. The policies seem to be designed to help minority individuals, or individuals who are not considered Han Chinese, to assimilate into the Han Chinese society. So again, everything is based on one standard. Han Chinese, Putonghua, if you don't speak it, you're considered illiterate. If you do, you're considered literate. With globalization and modernization and marketization being such a huge thing in China right now, they have 2 dominant languages for sure. The first one being Mandarin, and then the second one is actually English as their world language. So I found that to be quite interesting as well. But because the landscape has such complex linguistic standards, it just it just seems that it's just really hard for a policy to be created that's going to not not push somebody out. And we'll also talk a little bit about how provisions, how fiscal provisions are not given to specific groups, especially in rural areas, in order to meet the standards of learning that would make an individual literate instead of illiterate. In China's Country Study again, Heidi Ross 2015. I like this lady Evelyn Rowski. She's excellent because she really points out the contradictions in the perception of literacy here in China. She contends that, again, it's measured by only one standard, and because of the landscape, because there's so many, the country has always been known to have different dialects and different regions speaking different type of local languages, that you can't measure literacy on one standard. It has to be broken down into multiple factors. She also talks about how individuals are learning a language that's basically only allowing them to work and function within their occupation or specific things for their daily lives, but they're not really literate in any other way. So yeah, I thought that was quite interesting for her to specifically state. The next thing that we'll talk about is let's see, the privilege that is given to language and literacy is most often given to people in urban areas. Those individuals are again, they're given the opportunity to learn the standard language versus somebody in the rural areas. And in my personal opinion, I don't think that this is a great way to judge if a person is considered literate or illiterate. The next thing that I'll talk about is how the government has used several generations worth of aspirations and like language or in policies in order to create like this new policy. So they were able to grab things from past history, and I think that this is why they thought that they were making a comprehensive language policies for their citizens. But again, I don't know if it's really working. They were able to draw from the roots of the Manchus and the nationalist formal school systems. They're also using the YMCA's health campaigns. They chose to use the literacy movement that was experienced in the Soviet Union, and then they also chose to use Chinese village schools, which again, I'm thinking that if they're using the roots of a village school in China, that they're trying to they're specifically focused on their rural citizens. So I think it's a great idea, and I understand that they feel that having all four of these components that make up the basis of their policies are going to be able to hit every sect of their population. The thing is that there's uneven distribution of literacy and education provisions in contemporary China, and these things are directly related to the function of poverty, the remoteness of a region from the market centers, cultural patterns that privilege males in education over females, discrimination against and the neglect of minorities and disabled peoples. And it's also the consequence of an elite social order that is reluctant to give power to non-elite individuals in the society. Any push towards politically empowering literacy for individuals in the rural areas or wherever not considered the elite society, I feel they think it may pose a threat to the social order. And so I think this might be a bit intentional. We can't give them too much power, because then it could pose a threat to what we're doing here. Let's see. The next thing that I will talk about is, and it will be my last topic, is what sparked China's interest in learning English, and then the war on English. So in Robert and Joe 2014 talk about the English craze and how it actually started after the Opium War. There was a lot of English language institutions that popped up, foreign language schools, but you know, it was never really, English was never really considered a national language. It was actually Russian that was considered the national language up until the 1950s. Then you have this reemergence of Deng Xiaoping, and you have a push towards globalization, which in turn is a push for English language learning. So since China wants to compete in the global markets, you see policies that are specifically designed to educate their individuals using the English language. And it's really interesting, because now you start to see, because China has succeeded and China has become a global market, and because China is now competing with top countries, you see more of a push of Confucius Institutes popping up around the world as well, of individuals who are coming to China or are studying in Confucius Institutes, trying to learn the language, trying to learn the culture. I personally think that this is great, just because I agree that, you know, I always tell China, you know, you guys have 5,000 years of history. I don't know if you guys have heard that. I have 5,000 years of history. And I'm not saying that the West knows what they're doing at all times. And I think that I'm starting to see a national pride that I didn't see in 2011. I saw, I want to be Western, I want to do this Western, I want to talk like a Westerner, I want to move like a Westerner, I want to think like a Westerner. And I was like, why, you know, think like a Chinese. So I'm really happy that I see more Confucius Institutes popping up. And me personally, I can say that I've still think like a Westerner, but I definitely have some Chinese thinking in my brain. The next thing that we'll talk about is the really big push that happened with English language, and this was back in 2006, when it was 2 years before the Olympics started in China. And so China wanted to get over 100,000 citizens, taxi drivers, hotel receptionists, restaurateurs, wait staff. They wanted to get all these individuals English ready for the Olympics to come to Beijing. So you have a ridiculous amount of English language training schools popping up, and you actually have 165 million kids and adults who are learning English from 2006 and onwards. This is just not a ridiculous, but just a really large number of people who are studying English in China, and this is why China is considered the largest global market for English language teaching. Learning English in China opens up the doors for globalization and opportunities, and it also provides a lot of opportunities for their citizens. Like, citizens are able to get more jobs. Citizens are able to work in international companies, to train outside of China, to get a higher salary because they have English language. So yeah, I understand why people, you know, want to learn English so bad. The last thing we'll talk about is the war that we're going through right now. It started in 2014. I was here for this. I remember when there was newspaper articles that came out and said, you know, we have to do something about this Western influence, this Western cultural values are starting to, to poison the minds of Chinese people. And it started all from the show Big Bang Theory. And I think it was just some sexually explicit scene. And I don't know, the government must have gotten wind of it or something. But they were like, listen, we are banning this. No more on Youku, on Tudo. They banned it. They banned that show, Big Bang Theory. They banned The Good Wife. They banned a couple of more shows because they were just too Western. Too Western. In this article by Robert and Joe, it talks about the integrity of the Chinese languages and how it's being damaged by English. You have a lot of students who don't know how to write specific characters simply because of technology, and also because you have them more focused on learning English than actually learning Chinese characters or Chinese history. The last thing I'll talk about is how you can see that there's specific reforms that are happening that are going to alter our jobs and our positions here in China. The Zhongkao and the Gaokao, again, for the high school examination to get into high school, the Zhongkao and the Gaokao to get into university, used to have a section on the test that was worth 150 points for English, higher than the Chinese and mathematics. So you have to do better in someone else's language than your own language. And so they X that. They decided, okay, 150 points can no longer be the test. It's going to have to be 100 points. The Chinese is going to have to be more. It didn't say specifically what that number was, but they decided that Chinese and mathematics has to come before English studies. The reforms pose a threat to thousands of Chinese individuals who got caught up in the feverish, trend of learning English, who decided to go to university to study English, to be English teachers. But with this new policy and the new reforms, this is kind of making their futures seem a bit unclear, because they are already seeing a dwindling of jobs in China for Chinese English teachers. The other thing is that they talked about how they're worried about private institutions getting more money and charging more money because there's been a lessening of English language being taught in the local school system. So you have more parents who are wanting their kids to go abroad, who are wanting to score good on the Zhongkao and the Gaokao, but they're not getting the English training that they need in the schools, so they're going to the private schools to get that extra study time, and they feel that this is going to provide, or this is going to create and produce more inequalities in the system. There's already inequalities with rural versus urban as far as money, as far as what is considered literate and illiterate, and now you have English is one of the main components, the second national language. You're no longer offering it in these schools, and individuals that are able to pay for these extra classes will ultimately be able to reap the rewards of scoring well on the Zhongkao and the Gaokao. They can get those extra points that they didn't get on their mathematics or science or whatever else that they didn't score well on. And English, they can score well on that. So I liked all of the articles. I thought that it was really insightful as far as what China is trying to do to produce and to create a fully literate society. And I just don't know if their policies that they're implementing are actually in the best interest of all of the individuals, or if they're focused on the elite, the people who are able to afford schooling, the people who are able to afford extra classes and things like that. I'm not sure. I like the fact that they're implementing policies. I like the fact that there's a pushback from English, because there's a high there's a lot of Western cultural values here in China, and I don't think that really is in the best interest of the CCP. I think it does pose a threat to the social order, and Xi Jinping as a nationalist is going to do what he has to do in order to maintain the integrity and the existence of the CCP. So that concludes my presentation. I'm going to go ahead and post my assignment on Blackboard for you to do. Dr. Wyman, 2 to 3 hours worth of work. It's not going to be too difficult, but it's definitely going to, you're going to have to communicate with your classmates and to summarize an article that I will also be posting on Blackboard. So you guys have a good night, enjoy your holiday, and talk to you soon. Bye.